Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Today is March 17th. Happy St. Patrick's Day. We're here at City Hall, and we have such an opportunity for one of our community members to give us an update on immigration. We know many of our community members out there want information, and we have the opportunity to have Dr. Marc Santamaria here with us to provide us an update. And this will be recorded so that you can also make sure to share this with other community members. So thank you very much, and I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Marc Santamaria. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Honorable Mayor Justin Manalo. I do want to start off by thanking Justin Manalo especially, and this Daly City Council. They have been very supportive of immigrants, and I'm proud to have them as leaders of this amazing city. So thanks again to Justin Manalo and the City Council of Daly City. So today we're going to talk about latest immigration news, immigration options, and a lot of things going on in immigration world. And so let's begin the presentation today. Okay. If you have questions, it's a good time to start taking notes. And if you have further questions, you can contact us. My email and contact information is there. And because this is for Daly City, and as a Daly City resident myself, we would be honored to give free consultations to Daly City residents in our San Francisco office. And if you have questions, we can give one-to-one interviews and consultations after the presentation. These are the main things that we'll talk about today. First, we're going to introduce ourselves, talk about the latest immigration news, from local news to national news, talk about Know Your Rights information and options for immigrants. And disclaimer, this is general information and does not create an attorney-client relationship. A little background about me. I'm practicing California licensed attorney, and I grew up here and lived here all my life in Daly City. And so it's such a pleasure to serve the community, especially the immigrant community. And we do speak different languages. I personally speak Mandarin and Tagalog. I'm learning Spanish and doing what we can to help immigrants of different ethnicities. And this is our team here. We speak different languages. We have fluent speakers of Spanish, Tagalog, Vietnamese, Arabic, and a couple other languages. So we're going to move into one of the main points for today, which is the latest immigration news. And we're going to start with local news. As some of you may know, there was a confirmed raid, and a raid is when immigration officials like ICE search for people that may or may not have documents. And this was just recent, about a month ago, where ICE agents raided about 77 7-Eleven stores in Northern California. And their goal was to find undocumented individuals at these 7-Eleven stores. And so they would go to these stores and ask the store bosses for their employees what's called an I-9. And in this I-9, it basically says that you are eligible to work in the U.S. And if the employer could not provide one for the employee in question, then they got detained. So that's what happened at these 7-Eleven stores. And so if you are a business owner, make sure that you have an I-9 ready and make copies for you and your employee. And also just recently, this was big news in the Bay Area where the Oakland mayor warned in advance that there would be immigration raids in Oakland, and they actually did occur. So that became a big political issue, and because of that, it became a big national issue. But most importantly, this is local news, and so this affected a lot of Oakland residents. And so, again, if you are working here, make sure you have your papers. If you're employing somebody, make sure you have the correct information on your employee. And if you are here undocumented, make sure you know your rights. We're going to get into what your rights are next, but make sure you do know your rights in an event that a raid does occur, like the one that happened in Oakland. So as for national news, DACA has been terminated. So the program will be phased out for about 2 years from now, and cases will naturally expire. So individuals with a current or unexpired grant of DACA will continue to hold DACA until it expires. So that's a big misconception that people have, that just because it was terminated that people no longer have DACA status. Actually, it means, for now, DACA recipients can continue to be protected from deportation and continue to have a valid work permit and until their DACA and work permit expire. However, we do suggest that if you do have DACA, try to find some sort of other immigration relief. We know it's hard, it's not something you can easily get, but you should speak with an experienced immigration attorney or someone, a professional who can help you find your immigration options, which we'll go over next as well. And also nationally, there's the TPS that was terminated with respect to El Salvador. So TPS is something that's offered for people who suffered from a country that was inflicted with war, natural disaster, and other extraordinary conditions. And so what this does is it helps give nationals the opportunity to obtain their work documents, like their EAD card, but does not lead to lawful permanent resident status. The Trump administration announced that the protections for nearly 200,000 immigrants from El Salvador would end in 2019. Many have lived in the U.S. under TPS since 2001, when there were some earthquakes that devastated their homeland. They have until 2019 to decide whether to return to El Salvador or risk deportation if they stay without legal protections. So similarly with DACA recipients, if you are on TPS status and from El Salvador, you should consider first renewing your TPS if possible, if you are given that time frame to extend your TPS status, but also try to find some other form of immigration relief, which we'll go over later, for example, like asylum or U-visa. So now is the time to start thinking about what options you have. Something that did not get that much local or national attention is the policy that is already in effect with respect to social media. So if you do have social media and use it, you should be aware of what is going on with the social media policy. So this is already in effect, and where it means that even if, let's say you're a green card holder, you would still be subject to this policy where U.S. collects information on public posts of your social media accounts. So obviously, think before you post. Think about what you're gonna say, then post. But obviously, it's safer to not post anything that is that would put you in danger of deportation. So just be careful of what you post. And this is already policy. So just, again, I can't say it enough, but just be careful of what you post. They can use that information to build a case against you. So let's say out of all of these recent news developments, you feel like you're at risk of deportation, of any kind of action against you. So you might be asking, what can you do? One thing is to make a plan. That plan means if you are, God forbid, separated from your family, at least you have a plan ready in effect if you are picked up by ICE. So, for example, that plan would entail having documents with you that you trust, and you give those documents to somebody you trust, like a family member or a close friend. And in those documents, you would have your children's passports, if they're U.S. citizens, IDs, important contact information, medical information of your children, just in case you are picked up by ICE. If you have children, at least they would have some sort of consistency in their lives. So maybe in the future we can do presentations specifically preparing parents in the event of separation by ICE. And another thing is to know your rights. These may be obvious to some people and may not be to others. One is the right to remain silent and right to an attorney. So the right to remain silent is actually a right that we take for granted. And the right to remain silent should be something where that you should know that you have this right, even if you're undocumented. And that's important because in the event that officers of ICE just question you and you don't know what to do necessarily, what should you do? Well, you have the right to remain silent. And it sounds obvious now, but in the heat of the moment, people are nervous, they don't know what to do, and they're feeling pressured by people. Just remember that you do have the right to remain silent. And because they will ask you a lot of questions, like where are you from? Are you here legally? What's your name? Those kind of things. And so it's best to have an attorney with you when they do ask questions like that. So when it gets to that point, please do remember that you do have the right to remain silent, and it is best to have legal representation with you when that time comes. So let's say that you are approached by ICE at home. What should you do? First of all, would you know if they are ICE? Not always. ICE agents often pretend to be police. And actually, sometimes, and we've heard of and know of stories where they don't come in and have those ICE uniforms, but actually pose as members of the community or have some sort of false pretense in who they are. So, for example, there's one example where in LA there was people who came to a person's house and they pretended to be the neighbors and told the people living there that their car was stolen. So imagine if that were you, how would you feel? I would feel nervous. I wouldn't know what to do. I'd feel mad. I wouldn't be thinking straight, right? So that is exactly what they wanted, and because of that, they gave identifying information based on that representation of who they were. So just be careful. It's best to keep your door shut and ask who's at the door. Okay, and that word door is very important. We all have rights, privacy rights, and so when somebody comes knocking on your door, you have to be careful of opening it, because if you do, it does give implied consent that they can enter. So the question then becomes, can ICE agents enter my home to arrest me? One important word here is the warrant. So ICE agents have to have a warrant signed by a judge and if they don't, they cannot enter the home. So, and about the warrant, there's certain things that should be on it. A signature by a judge, your name spelled correctly, and your address spelled correctly. And if they are not, then it might be an invalid warrant. And if it is, you should point that out and have them slip it under the door for you to inspect or show it at a window. And again, do not open the door. So that way, again, you're checking to make sure if they have a valid warrant or not. And if they don't, they cannot enter. And not just at home, but you should have a red card with you, which is a card that shares your rights, what we mentioned earlier, the right to remain silent and right to an attorney, and a G28 with you. So what is a G28? A G28 is a form that allows you to have representation by an attorney. And so it's better to have one ready and a specific attorney ready so that in the event that something happens, your attorney will be ready to support and represent you as soon as possible. So it's best to find an attorney you trust, an experienced one, maybe someone who also lives close to you, and who would be willing to help you at the drop of a dime. Because these events of detainment happen very quickly, and you need someone you trust who can help you very quickly. So this form helps in that process. And if you have one with you, in addition to the red card, then it helps speed things up in terms of defending you. So again, this is a G28, and we suggest that you find an attorney that can agree to representing you. So we've been presenting a lot of news that may make you feel uncomfortable, unsafe, and confused. You have a valid reason to feel that way and feel kind of lost. But you may be thinking still, well, what hope is there? Well, how can I protect myself? Well, all we can say is we still, for us at least, we still fight for our clients. We still do what we can, and we still get good results. So this is an example of a recently passed, approved visa just last month. Here's another one, work visa. So this is also just last month, very recent. But this is what it takes. Okay, so if you want to get in status, change your status, adjust your status, this is what it takes. So that's why it takes good teamwork with you and your legal representative to put together the right case for you. And please note that for any kind of immigration relief, it takes time. So plan this out and take into account the amount of time it takes to prepare a case, submit a case, and wait for the results. And during your wait, there usually is something called a request for further evidence, where immigration wants something more from you. So that slows down the process. So keep that into account, please. So then you may be asking, how can I get in status if I'm here undocumented? You have some options. Here are the keys to that. So some options include, if you're here undocumented, marriage. But it's not as easy as it sounds. Even though you do get married to a U.S. citizen or resident, you do have to go through what's called the I-601A, waiver of unlawful presence. So it's not like a regular fiancé visa case where the U.S. citizen just petitions his foreign or her foreign spouse. There's a whole another process added in addition to that through this process called I-601A. And the key word for marriage, if you're undocumented and you marry a citizen, is hardship. So you have to show that if you were to be separated from your U.S. citizen spouse, and children, that there would be an extreme hardship that occurs within the family if you were to be separated. So in addition to marriage, there are other options if you're here undocumented. There's what's called SIJS, Special Immigrant Juvenile Status. And the key word for that is abuse. If your child was abused, neglected, then they may be eligible for status if they crossed here or overstayed their visa. As long as they were under 18, they can. As long as they are under 18, they can apply for this benefit. But again, the key word there is the child suffered some sort of abuse from one or both parents. So that's the key word, and that's SIJS. Another form of relief is asylum. And asylum, one key word to that is persecution. Persecution basically means fear, and fear is caused by some sort of harm. And so one thing to note about asylum is you do have different kinds of grounds for it. For example, your race, nationality, religion, political opinion, or a particular social group called PSG. You have to be in one of those groups, and you also have to note that there's a year time bar. So meaning you have to apply for asylum within a year. But even though there is that 1 year deadline, you do have exceptions and to that 1 year time bar for applying for it. But you should also note that they're pretty hard to get. However, if you think you qualify for an exception to the 1 year rule, then speak with an immigration attorney to see if you do indeed satisfy that exception. Another thing to note about asylum cases, just a couple of years ago in San Francisco, there was a pretty high rate of success for asylum cases. For example, there was, last time I checked, there was like 3 years ago, that's 70% pass rate of asylum cases. But late last year, the reports came in and there's only about 46% pass rate of asylum cases in San Francisco. And San Francisco has the highest pass rate of asylum cases in all the country. And so please note that as you consider applying for asylum or not. So another form of relief is TPS, Temporary Protected Status, as we mentioned earlier. For example, the people from El Salvador still have it. But there are other countries that do have this. And the key word for that is if you're part of a designated country. So TPS is not granted to everybody, but it is granted to certain countries that are designated to have this status. And so please check. You might be eligible for it. For example, a few years ago, there was a big earthquake in Nepal, and people from Nepal applied for TPS and were granted TPS. So please consider that. Another form of relief is VAWA. It stands for Violence Against Women Act. And the key word here is abuse. So, for example, if you are married to a U.S. citizen and you do not have documents here, then you may be eligible for VAWA if you were a victim of abuse by your spouse. Typically, it's a woman who gets abused by her U.S. citizen spouse, husband. And so if you suffered abuse, then consider this. And one thing to note about abuse, it does not necessarily just mean physical abuse. It could mean emotional abuse or even mental abuse. So again, please speak with an immigration attorney to see if you qualify for that. And so if you do qualify for it, then you don't have to rely on your U.S. citizen spouse to have your status. You can apply for VAWA by yourself. It's called self-petitioning in form of immigration relief. So if you have such a case, you don't have to wait for your husband or spouse to help you. You can do this yourself with the help of an experienced immigration attorney. Next is the U visa. This is for victims of crimes. The key word here is harm. So with the U visa, if you were a victim of a crime and you don't have documents here, but you did suffer some sort of crime by some perpetrator, you may be eligible for status here if you helped the police or any other approved official solve the crime. You suffered abuse, and there was a qualifying crime. And there's a list of crimes that fit under the U visa. Some examples include domestic violence, entrapment, false imprisonment, and others. So it doesn't apply to petty crimes, but there is a list that you can refer to see if that crime qualifies for the U visa. Another form of possible relief is if you are actually related to a U.S. citizen. You never know. That's why it's good to check your family records. That's the key word there. You'd be surprised to know that there's some people who never knew their relatives, their grandparents. And it does happen from time to time where somebody is related to a U.S. citizen, grandfather or grandmother, and that may be a way to get status. And these are some options for you if you're undocumented. But let's say you are actually here and you're here legally. Maybe you just want to change your status, stay here longer, get a work visa or a green card. What can you do? So obviously there's marriage and relative petitions. One thing to note about the relative petitions is that it takes a long time. So we do live in Daly City, and there are a lot of Filipinos here, a lot of other Asians, like Chinese, people from Mexico that live in Daly City. And I mention that because there's a backlog for people who are from countries that I just mentioned. For example, in the Philippines, there's one category where it's U.S. citizen related to petitioning a brother or sister. If I remember correctly, it's about a 25-year wait time for relative petitions. So let's say you're here already and you have a relative petitioning you from the Philippines. And what can you do? You still have to stay in status. That can be really difficult for people because, for example, in that category where they have to wait 25 years for this relative petition to finally work, during this 25 years they have to stay in status. So they have to find another alternative like a student visa or some other visa. And for those people in those situations, we suggest a work visa. So these kind of business visas here are some other options for you if you have a long waiting time for a relative petition. So here are some examples, such as the E1, E2 visa, which is available to people from Mexico, the Philippines, and some other countries. It's not available to all countries, but only to certain people from certain countries. The requirement is that the U.S. and the country you're from has a E2 treaty. And so if you do want to start or expand or purchase a business, this may be an option for you. And so this is a good option if you are a foreign entrepreneur or if you want to just purchase a business. This may be a good option. Sometimes people ask, what is the minimum requirement to invest in a business? It really does depend. There is no minimum stated requirement, but it does depend on the business. So, for example, if you purchase a food truck versus purchasing a consulting business, the startup costs vary, so it does depend on the kind of business. Then you have to have or make a business plan to back it up. So that's the E1, E2 visa. Then similarly, there's something called the L1A visa for executive transferees. So if you're an executive from abroad or know somebody who is an executive or high-level manager who does want to work here, the foreign business can send this individual to the U.S. To expand or manage the foreign business. And that's L1A. Then there's O1 for individuals with extraordinary achievements and abilities. This is for people who have awards, have recognition, and can prove it. So people who have awards in acting, arts, painting, they can be eligible for this visa. And it doesn't just stop at people from an artist background. It actually can be from people with a business background or almost any background. As long as we can prove that you do have an extraordinary background, this may be a way to get a work visa here. And along those lines, there's something called the National Interest Waiver. So if you do have some sort of research that you can show does provide some sort of amazing or very impactful help to the country or the local community in which you live, then this might work for you if you have some sort of research that you've done, for example, in science and technology. Then moving along, there's the EB5 visa. This is for investors. The difference between the E1, E2, and EB5 visa is with the EB5 visa, there is a minimum requirement of $500,000. There's another option of $1 million if you do want to start or expand your own business for that $1 million option. Then there's also the $500,000 option if you invest in what's called the regional center. And so that regional center would take your investment funds and use that in its EB5 regional center project. For example, and this happens a lot with construction and constructing hotels so that's a very popular example. Then there's also the H-1B visa. This is for people with specialty occupations. One thing to note about this, however, is that there's a deadline for this, which is April 2nd this year. And there's very little time to get this done. So you do want to start and get this turned in as soon as, get this ready as soon as possible so we can meet the deadline of April 2nd, 2018. Then there's the EB3 visa for skilled professionals and unskilled workers, especially if you are from one of those countries that I did not mention, then this might be better for you. But if you are from China, India, Mexico, or Philippines, there's already a long backlog for this visa. But if you are unskilled, but you still want to continue and find a job here, then EB3 might work for you. So moving forward, please remember that you do have two important rights, documented or undocumented, and they are the right to remain silent and right to a lawyer. Remember that you do have options. If you are undocumented, you should speak with an immigration attorney to find out if you indeed do have them. And please make a plan. Maybe we can have another session where we explain exactly what comes in this plan, but in the event that you are separated from your family, please have a plan ready to go. So have documents, identifying documents, letters of support, anything like that to put in a safe place and to give with somebody you trust in the event that you are separated from your family. And another thing to think about is to improve your English, because sometimes you have to go through this process and maybe you're in court and the interpreter is not doing necessarily a good job. at least you'll be able to know if if the interpreter is doing a good job or not, if you continue to improve your English. And so please note that there are a lot of ESL classes out there. I currently teach at City College of San Francisco. It's free. The non-credit program is free. There are different campuses, many campuses in San Francisco. Daly City has courses too at Ceremony Del Rey, and that's a very good program as well. And so they also have really good teachers there in Daly City, Ceremony Del Rey. And also, please find a community organization that can help. There are many community organizations that can help, and a lot of pro bono immigration attorneys that are willing to help. We did leave some free materials here, and if you are interested in taking some, feel free to do so. We have them in different languages, Spanish, Portuguese, Chinese, Arabic, and English. And we also have Know Your Rights cards. We thank you for the community collaborative with the Latino collaborative. They also help with, they have a health equity initiative, and it's really good for the Latino community to reach out to them. They're based here, and there's the contact information of Frances Lobos. Her phone number is 650-372-3272. Frances Lobos, 650-372-3272. Her email is flobos@smcgov.org. flobos@smcgov.org. And again, that's for the Latino community. They're called the Latino Collaborative, based in San Mateo County. And please again note that they have the Health Equity Initiative. And here's our information here. If you have further questions, feel free to contact us. And again, we do give free consultations to Daly City residents. Thank you for your time, and thank you again.